underway. Some of you saw the announcement in the paper. It seemed to have been a heart attack overnight with pain. I talked to his sister. It happened about 2 or 3 months ago. There may be, many people didn't know, and there may be a memorial service which we'll keep you posted on. Mark was very active in this group for some time, and those of us who knew him will clearly miss him. A couple of other health notes. Anita Newell was here somewhere, and I don't want to embarrass her too much. Has had quite a bout of illness. One of our original strong members has not been able to be here for a while, and Anita's back tonight. We're happy to see you. Esther Tucker, another one of our original group, had surgery today. Medicinal, has had chemo off and on, so we haven't had to talk about these kinds of things in this group before, but we've had around some issues here, so I wanted to mention all of that. You all know, if you don't, you should turn over your leaflet on your chair, that we're moving. This is our last meeting here at this church. We will be across the street that way. Some people think it's more in the middle of town, but we will be at the Church of the Redeemer, which has a very nice meeting room. We've had one meeting there, and we'll be in September. And we tried to give you some directions on the back of your sheet. You might want to keep it. This church.
Excuse me, Michael. Ralphie, we need some chairs. My chairperson.
Excuse me.
All right, let's get organized here.
Yeah.
People have asked me why the move. We have been here 9 years. This church has gotten more active. Could no longer guarantee us a regular meeting space. Sometimes they could, and some they couldn't. We decided it would be best to move. I was hoping to read it tonight, and I couldn't find it this evening. I will. Very nice letter from the minister here, saying how nice it was to have us here all this time. We kind of fell into this, and I'll tell you, it was a joke to me when I had to make the change, because we're so used to being here. But you will find that it's a very nice meeting room there, and we can have refreshments if we get volunteers to become our refreshment coordinators. We'll pay if you cook. I'm not necessarily expecting that, but we do have access to a kitchen. So don't forget to come. We'll put a sign up, but don't forget to come to the wrong place in September. Our September speaker is a cancellation from earlier in the winter, Albert Coker. He does walking tours and has really been apparently gets very good reviews on his tours, and he's going to come and talk to us. Anita Kalina-Smith is a regular here, will talk to us about Dream Theater in October, and in November, having just gotten our new home, we're going to leave it for a night and go over to the Whiteman School, which we had a talk on the history of the Whiteman School down here on Solway before. One of the reasons we're going to do this, they're now LEED certified, which has to do with lots of environmental changes they've made, and they want to show us what they've done as part of the lecture. So that'll be in November, and pretty soon we'll get an announcement of what's remaining. I am Mike Ehrman. I'm chairman of the group. We've been here for 8-9 years now. We have these talks every Tuesday night, once a month. I couldn't organize it that well. Once a month, except in August. We do walking tours once a year. I will have an announcement later about that. By the way, the Chatham tour was excellent again. We're only going to do it, we're going to change now, because usually 2 years is a good time. Nice group. We made another contribution to them, and they just not only showed Chatham, but someone on Murray Hill Avenue, was it, invited the group into one of those beautiful houses there, and it went really beautifully. We don't charge for our meetings, but we welcome memberships, and there are membership forms on the back. Our speaker, who you're here for, not me, tonight is Susan Rademacher. Susan is Parks Curator at the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy. Park Conservancy has spoken here once 3 or 4 years ago. They were also the second largest contributor to our Squirrel Hill book in terms of photographs. Susan has been with the Conservancy about 3 years. She was in Louisville before that and didn't really know Pittsburgh very well. She says that the Parks Curator position she's in is probably the first one in the country. But then she can explain the role of the Parks Conservancy here is very unusual anyway. So without further ado, Susan.
Thank you all. It's great to be here tonight, and I'm especially excited about my speaker's gift because I've been standing at the bookstore looking at this, and I put it on my list for our library at the Parks Conservancy. I'm really surprised we don't have a copy, but it's a wonderful resource, and thank you very much. Is there a mic? No, but I'll speak up. You all can hear me okay in the back? Please let me know if I start to fade out. It is interesting to me to be in Pittsburgh after having been in Louisville, Kentucky, because in Louisville, where I headed up the Louisville Olmsted Parks Conservancy, we had one park system that was designed by the same firm, starting with Frederick Law Olmsted and ending with Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. over a 50-year period. 18 parks, 6 parkways, all designed within the context of one firm, one philosophy. And it changed over time because park design went through several different eras, starting with the beautiful picturesque parks, of which Central Park was really our first, and then coming into the 20th century with the reform parks, which were about playgrounds and exercise and gymnasia and programming and playgrounds, playground leaders and crafts and things like that, up until World War II, when typically investment in parks started to fall off in favor of other municipal interests. So in Louisville, it was kind of one coherent picture, and it was a wonderful place to be. There was a wonderful parks if you ever have a chance to get down there. But what I really love about Pittsburgh is that its landscape has so many different stories to tell. And each of our regional parks, from the very first one, which was actually Highland Park, through Shenley and Riverview and Frick, and the latest addition, the Mount Washington Grand View Scenic Byway, or now what is known as Emerald View Park. They all capture stories about the people who have lived here and what their aspirations were, what their tastes were, and how the way we use parks individually and as a community has changed over time. So I am still learning, and I hope that some of our discussion tonight will bring some new information to me. I have a long list of research questions that I'd like to explore, and I bet that there are some people in this audience who have some knowledge that would be really helpful to share. Because what I want to do over time with the Parks Conservancy is to really get these stories told, so that people will appreciate the cultural value of our landscape, not just the environmental value, not just the play value or the value to your property and to stabilizing a neighborhood, but the cultural value of the parks themselves as a work of art over time created by the people who live there. So with that, I'm going to obviously focus on Frick Park. And Ralph is going to help me walk through this. And again, a lot of this is very familiar story. Henry Clay Frick, the coal kid who had such a notorious reputation as a strike buster and the right hand of Carnegie, also was an amazing philanthropist and often unsung. Here in Pittsburgh, one of the things that he did was guarantee $40,000 in life savings of members of a local savings and loan that was going to go under. And he stepped up and said, no, these people are not going to lose their life savings. I'm going to guarantee and it wasn't his bank, he didn't have an interest in it, he was just concerned about that. And he did a lot of things like that that really aren't well known. But one of the wonderful things he did was to have a concern about the safety of children. And he doted on his daughter, next slide, Helen, who it's reported, although not documented anywhere, that she asked her father to give a park to the children of Pittsburgh upon the occasion of her debut. What's true is that they probably cared more about children's welfare than about creating a park, per se. The park was a means to an end. But over her lifetime, Helen Playfrick became an avid outdoorswoman, gardener, did a great deal, both here in Pittsburgh and elsewhere around the country, to promote the cause of landscape beauty and horticulture. So, and she continued to take an interest, along with her brother, in the fate of Frick Park over the years. Next slide. So how did Frick actually get to be named? Someone before we started this evening asked if the park was named to honor Frick. And in fact, it was named as a condition of his will. In 1919, when he died, his will laid out a very generous gift to the city of 151 acres, which became the heart of Frick Park. And not only did it include the land, but really more importantly, it included a $2 million endowment for the maintenance and improvement of the park. The proceeds from that fund over these years have both paid for the expansion of the park, for park planning, and for capital improvements, and even park programming and maintenance. And that's one of the reasons that Frick really is the best maintained of the parks in the regional park system of the city of Pittsburgh, because there was that extra source of dedicated funding. Next slide. So the will bequeathed the acreage and the $2 million trust fund. These things were huge news to the public, and there ensued a lot of debate about what to do with this land. But it was very clear in Frick's will and his intentions, next slide, that this would be primarily a nature reserve. That the core acreage would remain woodland, and in fact today it's the only park that we have in our regional system that has enough contiguous acreage in the woods for it to be just barely a healthy ecosystem. Because the critters that live in the woods have got to have enough continuous canopy and uninterrupted by roads and parking lots and other facilities to have a habitat and to do, their life cycle. And Frick is the only place where we have that, so it's really important to not only protect that, but to keep it healthy by keeping invasive plants at bay and by managing the water that's flowing into it and those kinds of things. Next. So just a beautiful image. You can never get enough of the beauty of a place like Frick Park. And as new as I am, I've covered a lot of the park. I'm still discovering lots of nooks and crannies. And I find that people who love and use the park often tend to focus on one area that they're really familiar with, but there's a vast acreage that a lot of people don't know yet. And so one of the things we really want to do is encourage people to explore the park. Again, partly by telling stories, also by putting in good quality signage, which is coming very soon. And other amenities, like hopefully some restrooms and some things that, more places to sit, things that will make it easier for people to explore and be comfortable at the same time. Next slide. So the Frick Woods Nature Reserve was actually called out on a map with the yellow highlighter, which we have in our office, and it was dedicated as such in 1991. We kind of are debating about the value of that. I think it's important to recognize what those boundaries were, but we really need to treat the park as a whole integrated thing. And I think it's a little bit artificial to say we're going to really pay attention to that 151 acres and then do pretty much whatever we want to the rest of it. The whole thing really has to be treated as one. And so we're really not promoting the Frick Woods as such, as something different than the rest of the park. It's just the core of the park. We'd rather look at it that way. It's like the well that all the good stuff comes from. The other really amazing thing about Frick Park, for any city park of sizable acreage, and especially one this big, is the fact that there really aren't roads in the park. That is such a treasure and something to really protect, be very protective about. The only, Commercial Street, of course, it was outside the park until 9 Mile Run was added, so that doesn't even count. And then the other road is the one that goes, there's the road that goes down into the parking lot, down in the hollow, but that's not a through road. And then, of course, Forbes Avenue, and I think we're all glad that that's there, so, next slide. So the expansion happened, as I mentioned, thanks mostly to the Frick Trust over many, many years. The first acreage, in addition to the 151, was 90, and the park, that was acquired actually before the park even opened. There was a long period of time, 10 years almost, between the death of Frick and the opening of the park. And that's something I really applaud, because so often there's a rush to deliver the goods, to cut the ribbon, to provide something. And here was a case where the trustees and the Citizens Committee for Community Park, something like that, the CCCP of Pittsburgh, it was a planning committee, really counseled deliberate, thoughtful planning of this park. And there were several different firms that were involved with planning the park and advising on acquisition. The first one was a really skilled surveyor and architect. The firm was Lowell and Vinal, and Mr. Lowell was primarily involved with this project, and he died right before the park opened. And as a result of that, then the work went to a local firm that was really just an engineering firm, not so much a design or planning firm, to continue implementing Lowell and Vinal's plans. But the vision for the park began to suffer at that point. And so then the Fricks brought in their landscape architects of choice, Innocenti and Level, a firm that was already working for them on their estates in New York. So you can see after the park opening, there was another big acquisition in 1936. And for those of you who haven't seen this wonderful map, I think it's in the book, but when you get to see this, there were a series of these illustrative maps done of the parks, I think in the 30s, that are just beautifully, storybook-like, with lots of little vignettes of park use and interesting names of places in the park. It's just a wonderful treasure, again, something that you don't find in most other cities. Next slide.
Before you leave the slide,
Yes.
is there a way you could briefly orient us?
Oh, yes, you can go back. So here is Forbes Avenue, and here's Murray, or not Murray, Brad coming down. Here's Beechwood Boulevard here, Clayton Hill coming up this way.
Do you know which part came from the country club in 1936?
Yes, this part,
Oh.
where the Mooseline Playground is. And actually, you can see in the topography, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute, you can see that some of the landform still has signs of tees and greens, and there are some artificially flat areas. Those are from the golf course.
Was there were there buildings that had to be taken down?
I'm sure there were, but it's something that we don't have record of. So that's one of my little mysteries. Next, let's go forward. Okay, so now, you have also the only regional park that comes very close to touching the river, not quite, but I think that's possible. Highland Park is kind of breathing down your neck because they have some run improvements next to the zoo in Highland Park, which are online and funded, will include the reconstruction of the bridge, and it will have now an arched opening like it did historically, so that theoretically we'll be able to take a trail under that bridge across the railroad tracks, which is another challenge, but down to a future riverfront trail going up the Allegheny. But that's pretty remarkable, that part of the size that actually goes from an upland, dense historic neighborhood all the way down to the river. Next slide. Go back one more. I forgot to mention my Olmsted connection here, which is that Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. Olmsted had two sons. Jr. became really a city planner. He was very instrumental in the Macmillan Commission in Washington, D.C., which kind of updated the L'Enfant Plan for Washington, and consulted with cities all around the country on their urban design and urban planning. The other son was an adopted son. It was his brother's son who died at a fairly young age, and Olmsted Sr. married the widow and adopted John Charles, who was really more of the artist, more of the landscape architect, designer. John Charles Olmsted worked a lot in Louisville on the design of our parks, but Frederick Jr., or Rick as he's known, was brought to Pittsburgh in 1911 to do a plan for the city of Pittsburgh and advise on all kinds of important things. He advocated very strongly to remove the hump of Grants Hill and reconfigure that area of downtown. That was one, I mean, lots of people had argued about that for a long time, but I think it was really his counsel that led the city to act on that. He advised the city to create the Liberty Tubes. He thought about where the seat of government should be in the city, symbolically. He advised that the city should acquire 9 Mile Run and add it to Frick Park. It took a really long time for the forces to converge to make that possible, but it was part of his vision. He analyzed in the county of Allegheny areas that had great potential for parkland, and he thought that this was one that could provide a reclamation from the industrial past, which it did, and a very important connection to the river, providing a park that had that much more to offer in terms of types of landscape and experiences that people could enjoy. So thanks to Frederick Law Olmsted, who started the ball rolling with 9 Mile Run, we now have full acreage of the park. So when people think about Frick Park, usually the thing that they think about as the signature piece or the character element are these beautiful stone structures with the French roof lines. They are very unusual, again, very elegant park structures. They were designed by John Russell Pope. 1935 is when they were built. $70,000 was spent with WPA resources to build these. And they're out of an interesting stone called the Chamonix stone, which is similar to granite, with limestone trim, and extremely handsome. In addition, Pope designed the cairn, which I showed in that first illustration, that just simple pillar that's at sort of at the intersection of Beechwood and Forks, and the small bus shelter-ish sort of structure on Forbes, which really needs to be preserved. But they're beautiful signature structures. They should give us all of our cues for future architecture in the park. Not just the stone, but the proportion, the roof line, the slate roof. Right now I'm working with the city's architect on a project to upgrade the shelter at the bowling green. And it's an interesting, it's a little service building. It has 4 columns in the front. It has an asymmetrical roof line. And the front half of the roof has a longer slant to it, and it curves a little bit as it approaches the columns. A typical city public works architect would say, we need to put a normal roof on there, it's going to cost too much. Well, thanks to this person who has a really good historic preservation perspective, we're going to keep the original roof line, and we're going to install slate composite, not real slate, but slate composite that matches what is on the gatehouse restoration. And we're changing the colors and putting the round gutters back on, and just doing general things to make the building work better. And that's what was done here. I mean, this may seem like a small project, the restoration of the gatehouse, but it's in the details. The subtlety of the details, I think, is what makes a project really special and creates that experience that, you know, makes it memorable for you. It makes it something that people will treasure and want to preserve and protect. So we're really proud to have works by John Russell Pope, who I think didn't do anything else in Pittsburgh. He was associated with lots of extremely significant heritage buildings like the Jefferson Memorial, lots of country estates, and just a very elegant firm. So that's one of the contributing features to our National Register eligibility for Frick Park, which I'll come back to. Next slide. So here's an aerial photograph from 1937, I think. This was a period during Innocenti and Webel's work. They started in the early 30s, worked through the 1950s, so they had a long record of shaping the park, especially through the acquisition of the golf course. One of the, there were sort of two big ideas that they were working with. One was established at the beginning, as I mentioned, that the heart of the park would remain the most natural, and that active uses, structures, additions, playgrounds, things like that would be kept to the perimeter of the park. So that's a basic design principle of the park. That's why we would never want to build any kind of a building, say, down in the valley, because that's sacred space. The new buildings belong on the perimeter, if there's a good case for a new building. So that was one principle, principle number one. And then the other principle was, this is a complicated landscape. Like all of Pittsburgh, it's pretty hard to read, and oftentimes easy to get lost and difficult to become oriented, unless maybe you grew up with it. So, and especially because this is so long, and it is bisected by Forbes Avenue, and the woods are so dense, and the slopes are so steep. So the other big idea was that Clayton Hill, which is right here, would be considered the main orientation point. And their plan made the entrance off of Beechwood the main entrance to the park there where the two gatehouses are. And the design had this beautiful axis, which is still there, to a fountain, very formal fountain, which over the years became a popular place for kids to run and play, and it had sort of the qualities that we like now in water features in parks. Of course, now it's filled in as a planting bed, so we'd like to get the fountain back there. And then the axis, the line of sight, turned and went uphill through a more naturalistic meadow, and today there is a naturalized meadow going up through the woods, and it arrived at a hilltop pool with, as you can see, basically no trees on this slope. And I'm not really clear about how many trees may have been removed. There were a lot of trees planted in this park to convert it from what it was in before 1927 to what we know today. But clearly, this was kept very open so that you would have a big view, a big vista from the top of Clayton Hill. And that was the place you were supposed to come first to kind of get the grand sweep of this amazing acreage and to orient yourself. Okay, I'm here, I can go up that way, I can go down that way, I can look at the treetops, I can see little bits of the city out beyond. So that was the big aha experience. And then from there, you were meant to go and explore the park along the beautiful trail system, which was laid out starting with Lowell and Vanell and continuing through Innocenti and Webel. So those are ideas that we want to keep in mind as we move forward with implementing the master plan for the park and for updating the master plan for the park, which I will also come back to. Next slide. This is that main entrance I mentioned. Now this, I think this same picture is in your book. And it looks kind of bare because it's a winter picture. But the thing to notice is how clean and simple and restrained and elegant this entrance is. It's just these beautiful gates, and you know the gatehouses are just beyond. The very nice ironwork, the handsome flagging, the path slightly rising to the fountain, shallow hole in the fountain, and then the axis turning and like luring you up the hill, kind of a seductive sequence meant to really draw you into the park. Next slide. So what we have today is sort of a sad shadow of it. And you know, when you've been in the parks business for a while, you just begin to understand that park management makes lots of little changes over time that erode the experience that you're meant to have through the design. So adding, first of all, there was a small barrier put here, and then later this planter was built there. So now the axis doesn't even have a clean sight line. It has, boom, a planter in your way. Of course, the trailers are there to provide a place for the programming since the Environmental Center burned in 2002. There's some kind of odd tree grate things there meant to keep cars from coming in. So there are these little additive changes that all together begin to create not just visual clutter but confusion, and they dull the impact, the aesthetic impact, the experience that you're seeking. Next slide. So this is the acreage. This was right after the golf course was added, and this is a picture from an area of the rough. But you can get a sense about how open that landscape was. And this is where massive, massive planting was done over time. And one of the things we need to do is try to find those planting plans, if we can, and go through and inventory and identify what was added then. So what was intended to shape the open spaces, the groves, the specimen trees, and then see if we can't begin to kind of recapture some of that layout of all the trees. Because I think that's been forgotten again, and things have been planted without respect to that.
Is that where they spend right now? Is that where they spend money?
Not, it's that area, but not,
You don't know what
I mean,
property-
that is the sledding, yes, that is the sledding.
Near Crombie, Nicholson, that section, or farther down the back?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
Yeah, it looks, that's right.
It is, though.
Yeah.
By the park, by the blue slide, like to the left?
Yes,
of the park?
this is the same area as the blue slide.
Okay.
Right. Okay, next slide. And then this is that same area but from a different angle. Yeah, just to give you that sense of the beautiful sweep of spaces. And this is still quite lovely, the way that the woods begin to pinch in and narrow the view, which makes the distance seem longer. That's just a lovely example of really great large-scale landscape design. Next slide. One of the things about the Blue Slide Playground that's interesting is that another very distinguished landscape architecture firm, Pittsburgh-based, did some design work here. And that firm was Simons & Simons. John Simons is one of the leading landscape architects of the 20th century, internationally renowned. He did Mellon Square downtown, which is a project we're getting ready to start restoring. But he did park work as well, and he was somebody who really wanted to integrate the ecology with beauty and bring those two things together. And so he was inventive, the idea of having a slide that's really part of the shape of the land. It was so great, and it really stimulates the children's imagination in ways that more conventional playgrounds don't. Next slide. So the work of the Conservancy has been going on since 1996. For those of you who don't know that story, just very briefly, Meg Cheever, who is our president, was a dog walker in Shenley Park. And like most conservancies around the country or friends groups, they started with people who were using the park, who were typically neighbors of the park, and who saw that these century-old parks were starting to really suffer the effects of age and benign neglect. So sometimes benign neglect's good, but when you have century-old drain tile systems that have failed, and then your drainage blows out, when you have buildings that have not been properly cared for and have had false fronts added or trim removed or flat roofs instead of peaked roofs, when you've had playgrounds plopped down in the middle of an important open space. Those are things that happen over time. And so Meg got together with some other people who were concerned about the condition of Shenley Park and went to see the mayor. I think this was Mayor Murphy. And he said, great, we'd love to have a nonprofit group raising money to restore the parks. That would be fantastic, but we want you to do all 4 regional parks, not just one. And so she took a big gulp and said, okay, we'll do that. And then, interestingly enough, she came to Louisville because we had been up and running since 1991. And we gave a little conference on park restoration. So she came with a couple of board members to see what we were doing, and that's when I first got to know her and started corresponding with her, and we shared advice and war stories over the years. But one of the things she realized as she was getting started was that, first of all, there needed to be a master plan. And that meant that there needed to be historic research to understand how these parks evolved over time, what their original intent was, what their condition is today, how people are using them, what people want and don't have, what the maintenance resources really are, and out of all of that, and the ecological condition, and then out of all of that, to synthesize a plan for going forward in a way that restores and protects the essential historic fabric while accommodating current uses as much as possible, and being practical, being possible to sustain over time. And so that master plan was completed 10 years ago. We are just now starting a process of updating our master plan. So I have cards in the back, and also up here on the table and on that table, that say, we need your feedback. And this is a website that we've just started as part of our master planning update process. We want the master plan to continue to be a real live plan. And people that were involved with it 10 years ago aren't necessarily involved with it with the same parks today. They may have moved on or what have you. People that are using the parks may not have any awareness that there is a plan, or there are certain values that should guide us. So, and things have changed. 9 Mile Run got added. The Environmental Center burned down. Shenley Plaza got restored. So we want to account for those things that have happened in the last 10 years. We want to take what we've learned and apply it to an updated plan going forward. So that's going to be happening over this next year. We're just now getting our same team that we had 10 years ago under contract to do this work with us. It's going to become part of the city's comprehensive plan. You may have been hearing about this plan, PGH, that the city is getting started with. So everything we do for the regional parks will become part of that, and the city council will adopt it. So it will actually have more teeth than it even does now. So it's exciting, and I hope that you'll all follow that and become involved as much as you wish. We're going to have some walks in the park over the next few months that will really be walk and talk about the park, and it's going to be led by our master planners. We don't want to have a lot of meetings just sitting down in a room together. We want to make it a little bit more interesting and rewarding. So that's all a long way of saying we had to start somewhere. So the Frick Gatehouse was a doable project. It was a fairly small scale, highly visible, and those are the reasons why it was chosen. If you go to the next slide. 9 Mile Run, as I mentioned before, about Olmsted, we have a very positive relationship with the 9 Mile Run Association, and of course, they've had a great leadership role in shepherding and stewarding 9 Mile Run. We continue to do work there as well. The Trails project that's going on right now to restore a lot of the trails in Frick Park is including significant portions in 9 Mile Run. The new bridge, pedestrian bridge, has finally gone in, and we advised on the design and placement of that, and we'll be putting a little bit of money into upgrading that. So that's an example of the kind of partnership that it takes to bring these projects about. Not just the partnership we have with Public Works and city parks and city planning, but with other community organizations and park advocacy groups. It really takes all of us together to make these things happen. Next slide. I'll go back just one because it's so pretty. For anybody who hasn't been down there lately. It really is beautiful, and it's resilient. I mean, it's taken some pretty tough storms, and there have been some significant blowouts. But we understand how the system works, and we know what needs to be done to keep it working. Because there's a plan and a deliberate method of management. And our Frick Park foreman, Dick Wolford, is a wonderful partner in this. He really understands horticulture and natural systems, and he's involved and engaged with every plan that we develop. So there's a, you know, it's a fairly seamless partnership that we bring to bear. Next slide. So the Environmental Center, I must say something about this, because one of my first jobs when I got here was to do a business plan for the Environmental Center. And the question was, first of all, why? You know, what is the need today? And out of all the ideas that came out of the community process from 2003 to 2006, like a daycare center, a nature-based daycare center, or a shop, or a restaurant, or different things that could generate revenue to support the Environmental Center. What of those things might be feasible? What should the budget be for an Environmental Center? What should the square footage be? How can the environmental education programs grow? And is it something the Conservancy should do? Is it going to create a black hole in terms of, always having to raise money for it? And how is it going to be self-supporting? So we took a year to do the plan, and we concluded that with the Frick Trust and with a really good partnership with the city where we're sharing some staff, where we're adding more programming, and with a fairly modest building that's more about getting into the park than it is about building a big, fabulous signature building. Although it will be fabulous, but it won't be a monument to architecture. That it was viable, that it could be sustained financially, and that it could really do something important for the city of Pittsburgh, which is to provide a public program for reconnecting children to nature, for providing that essential bond that young children need and their families need, and they need as they grow through all their stages of life with nature, which helps you think more clearly, it helps you sort out problems, it helps you develop physically, it helps you build social relationships, it helps you solve problems in your community. There's so many benefits to loving nature and to having that early bond with nature, and not the least of which is that we need citizens who have that bond if these kinds of resources are going to continue to be protected and well cared for in the future. So it's a whole life cycle that we recognize that environmental education needs to support. We also recognize that Pittsburgh used to have amazing environmental education programming. In every regional park, there was an environmental center or a nature center, and there were staff. In Riverview Park, there were 5 full-time staff people, for example. And there's a wonderful building there that's boarded up and used for storage. It could become sort of an outpost for environmental education. So we also realized that Frick, having the one viable program that was left, and they're doing amazing things there with a very difficult physical situation, very resourceful staff, that was the reasonable place for a home base for environmental education, and especially since it's that 151 acres of core quality woodland with a stream that goes to the river, where you can learn everything about the landscape, not just the ecology of the landscape, but also that cultural history that I was talking about at the beginning, because the way human beings shape the land covers that whole gamut, and that's the whole story of environmental education. It's not just what is nature, but it's what are we in nature. And it's about how we feed our souls, not just how we cool our city. It's the whole range. So we felt that, yes, Frick Park should be the home base for environmental education. All the work that was done before, coming up with the education through restoration, the idea of hands-on volunteering to restore the park and learning while you're doing that, all those ideas are solid and should be part of a new center. So we just got some money to really start the detailed design process. We just surveyed the site so we have accurate survey information, and we're working with the city on shared resources so that over this last year, we've been developing new education programs. with children and teens. And we've been working with the Environmental Center staff to combine resources. And we're really excited about where that's going. And there will continue to be a lot of public engagement in how that design comes forward. But it will be a very environmentally responsible building. And as I said, it'll be more of a portal to the park than than the end in itself. So we're pretty excited about that.
Is it in the same location?
Yes, and I should say we questioned all the location. There had been a locational study looking at commercial, looking at Braddock, looking at the current site, and we concluded that it needed to be relatively easy to get to, but it really shouldn't be on a main drag, because when you get there, you want to feel immersed in the landscape. And so it really is in the right place. And actually, the actual site where the building was, that sort of slope is where we've defined the new footprint. Although we plan to build it more into the slope. But that was an interesting, we just didn't want to assume anything. We wanted to look at the whole picture. So as part of our thinking about environmental education, we also began to think about how the whole park is the environmental center, not just the building. And so we started asking ourselves and the Nature Center staff about particular places that they like to use in the park to make particular points or to help people understand certain things or do certain activities. And out of that kind of brainstorming, we identified these 13 sites in the park that could become a particular place where a particular lesson is taught or discovered. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a classroom with seating. It might just be a clearing in the woods, or it might be a stone surface at the edge of a stream so that you're not turning it into a mud bath. So there's been no design yet. This idea is something that will be filtered through the master planning process. And if you've been aware at all of the controversy over the treehouse that's has been offered as a memorial to the two young children that one of whom went to the charter school, there was an idea that one of these outdoor learning spaces could be the site for that. But all of that's going to go through the master plan process. We're looking at the whole picture, not trying to just solve individual issues one at a time. Next slide. So I think that's maybe the last image, just to remind us that the history of a place is made every day, and that parks really are about giving the people who live in a community a place in which to form lasting attachments to nature and to each other and to the place they live in.
In just a moment. Two things. First, because I started losing members of the audience, an announcement. First week in June next year, our annual walking tour will be of Frick Park in conjunction with the Parks Conservancy. So we will look for announcements as we go. The second thing is, as some of you leave, I want to thank our membership and friends. The average attendance of we actually had 9 meetings this year, had 2 canceled, but the average attendance is again up 5 or 10, maybe 15 from before, and we appreciate the support. And now, Susan, questions?
Yes, I'm happy to talk about things. Yes, ma'am.
2 questions. First of all, I didn't hear what kind of rock the 2 gatehouses were made out of. And second, is it possible to walk from commercial to the Long River now? I mean, is that
Yeah, the stone is Meshaminie, Meshaminie, and it's similar to granite. But I don't know, I mean, it comes from the Meshaminie geology, but I don't know exactly anything more about it. I haven't studied on that.
You don't know where it comes from?
No,
It's not native.
probably not, because Pope was not native. So he was probably using materials that he favored, in his estate work generally. And then your other question, you can, although you have to be a little bit intrepid to actually get to the river. Now, this gentleman is shaking his head, no. I haven't done it yet, so.
You don't have to be too intrepid.
I've done it, yeah. And I mean, our goal is to really have a direct connection to the trail.
Get into that area.
Well, you would park, you could park in the parking lot. The only place to park in the park is in the parking lot that's down in the valley, Fern Hollow. And then go on down. You can park, I don't know if that's actually advised yet, but over at the Center for Creative Play. Now that work hasn't been done yet, at the foot of Braddock. That's not the name of it anymore, but it was an old grocery store. Yeah, it's just been bought by, right. So again, if you're kind of gutsy, you can make your way through there, but that area really hasn't been worked yet. So, and then down on Commercial, you know, there's the Irish Club. Yeah, you have to just kind of see here. So, question here.
I've lived about a half block from this park for about 40-some years. I saw the burning down of the old house that used to be a nature center, and then of this one, under rather suspicious circumstances as it was. It is strange to my adult mind that when there was insurance money and other money to start getting a project going to build a new place, they've let 8 years go by and watched an exponential increase in cost get involved here. So I would like, in what I would call, not to you, but an adult answer on where this extra money is coming from, and is this all blowing smoke, or is this something that's really going to move? 8 years is a bit. We could have built a lot of things in 8 years. And different administrations have come through, and one of which now we need to get rid of. But nevertheless, we have things that need to be cured, and this just seems to always be put on the sideline. And I would like for you to really give some more detail into this, because the old building, the latter one that burned down, that one at least had some expanses where some of these different clubs, environmentally related, could put up their booths and whatever, and you moved through the building, a lot of glass, a lot of whatever, and it worked rather well. What we're going to end up with now, I have no idea from what you've presented, but I realize you weren't here to present the Nature Center building talk, so I'll be quiet.
Well, and just remember that I wasn't here for that 8 years, so I don't know all the ins and outs. But my sense is that, well, first of all, the insurance money is still sitting there, waiting to go into the building.
Is it growing?
Yes, and the Frick Trust, there's some money there that hasn't been used that's also growing. And they have committed to using it for the new center. This visioning process that went on, I guess, from about 2002 to 2006. Some of you, I'm sure, were involved with it.
It was really wacky at the beginning.
Was it wacky?
Yeah, they were just, the architects were encouraging people to imagine Shangri-La or Hanging Gardens of Babylon.
Yeah, well, and that's part of it, is that what came out of that was a drawing and a floor plan for a building that, when we began to look at it more critically, really didn't make a lot of sense. First of all, it wasn't a really green building, which it has to be. It has to be. You know, our goal would be a carbon neutral building, and a building that shows how environmental process works and the way that it manages the water that hits the roof and that kind of stuff. But I do know that there were several stages from looking at the files, and one was this visioning that came up with this restoration through education through restoration theme. Then there was a location study that was done, where should it go? And then I think it just kind of didn't have any traction for a while because the price tag was pretty big that came out of that visioning process. And the Conservancy was asked to work on that visioning process, but there was a question about whether or not there was an appropriate role for the Conservancy going forward. And I think that's about when I came in and did that business plan. And the business plan said, yes, there is. And we had outside funding from local foundations for that. And then the big recommendation was that we should hire a director of education so that we could really jumpstart our own environmental education programming and figure out how to mesh the two together. And so we did that. We hired Rademacher last August. And she's been working with us in building some really good partnerships with the school board, unbelievably, and with some other organizations. And now we've just gotten a grant to do the design. I mean, the design itself, we're talking about a building that could be anywhere from, and landscape restoration. That whole historic area, Clayton Hill, restoring that is part of this project. It's not just building a building. So, you know, that's a multi-million-dollar project. So we now have the money to do the design work. And when the design work, when we, and we've interviewed some architects, we haven't selected anybody yet. But we'll get to a certain point in the design where we'll have a pretty good cost estimate, and we'll be raising the money to actually build it. We've got some interest from the state and from statewide foundations as well as local foundations and some individuals who are waiting to know what it costs and for us to make the pitch. So we are on the case now, and that's maybe a little bit different
What's
than
your
it
opening
was.
year?
Well, when I was doing the business plan, it was 2012. So I'd say it's probably
Should
around
we all
20.
laugh out loud right
No,
now?
I think honestly, it's probably 2013.
Well, that sounds reasonable.
It's about 18
considering the year
months.
we've blown off here.
Well, typically it's about 18 months from start to finish, if everything goes really well. And the approach that we're taking without having any design is to actually build it in perhaps a couple of phases. So our first goal is to have 2 really excellent classrooms and some covered outdoor space, so that the trailers can go away. And then the next phase is to build office space so that gatehouses can become one, a restroom, and the other, a ranger station, because we'd like to get park rangers back in the park. So, you know, there's sort of a longer term strategy.
What's the city's role?
Well, the city will continue to be the owner, and the Conservancy would have some sort of a partnership or licensing agreement or lease. It hasn't been determined, but there's been a lot of discussion over the last several months about what form that would take. The city would continue to have its environmental education staff. We've talked about just having a blended staff where we have some privately paid staff and then the city staff, they will work together. And that does work really well in some other park systems around the country. Prospect Park in New York is a really good example.
I
Yes.
have 2 questions related to each other. Basically, how do you get your money? Does the county and the state and the federal government ever contribute anything to your organization? Because, I mean, if you ever go to the park, it's pretty obvious that there are people from outside the city using these facilities, and I think they should do their fair share too.
Well, it is a regional park, meaning it's more than 200 acres, and it is serving the whole region. So it gets an annual maintenance funding and capital funding from the Allegheny Regional Asset District. That money goes to the city, which spends it through public works and through city parks. None of that money comes to the Conservancy. So the Conservancy raises its own operating money. So all of our staff, we have 20 people on staff, all of our staff we support through membership, special events, foundation grants, a small endowment that we're trying to grow, and the capital funds that we raise for projects come from that whole array, plus now we're starting to get some state money, amazingly, and some federal funding. And typically on projects that we do, we typically are in the lead on designing the project, and the city will come forward with resources it has. Sometimes it's just a construction crew that can do demolition and maybe some stone work. Other times it's direct capital dollars that will go to contractors. But we try to combine the resources that we have to make a good project. So it's different for each project that we tackle. But the Conservancy doesn't get any government support for our operations or for our projects.
My other follow-up question, I noticed that Mellon Park always seems to be included from this. Is this because they have their own source of funding or what's?
Well, Mellon Park is in the Park District that is managed by Dick Wilford out of Frick Park. So it is not a regional asset district park. So the people that are paid out of that money are only supposed to work in Frick Park. But Dick Wilford brings his knowledge and skills to Mellon Park. And there are volunteers through the Master Gardeners program that work in Mellon Park, and the Herb Society works in Mellon Park, and the Daylily Society works in Mellon Park, and now we're working in Mellon Park with the walled garden restoration. And we are raising a maintenance fund. Every project that we do now, and that's something I want to mention, has a maintenance fund attached to it. And that maintenance fund goes for things like routine repairs that are kind of specialized that the city wouldn't normally be able to do, higher level of horticulture, security oftentimes. So, in Shenley Plaza, we have 24-hour security. When we build the new environmental center, it will have security. So that'll be a difference in terms of what has happened to these kinds of buildings before, their vulnerability. Because nobody was home. It's like giving a party and nobody's home. You can't really do that and expect your house to stand. So I think that's a really critical difference, is that we're able to do that, and we're able to set money aside like that the city really isn't in a position to do. Let's go over here.
2 questions. The original trust fund from Frick, it was $2 million. What is it now?
Oh, I knew that. I don't know. I can't remember.
Has the principal
It
been?
yields about, I want to say it yields about $700,000 a year, between $600,000 and $700,000 a year, interest income, depending on what the market's doing. And there's maybe 2 or 3 million that has accumulated in it that's available to put into the project.
Okay. Right. Second question. I had heard that Frick originally acquired that land not for a park, but to build his bigger mansion here, and he finally decided to go to New York instead, where
Yes.
it's much more exciting.
That's true.
That is true, yeah. And was it going to be on Clayton Hill?
I've heard that, but I've never seen any proof of that. But it would be the logical place, because it was so commanding.
The gatehouses were not built until after the park.
Correct.
Right.
They were built in the 30s, and Frick died in 1917 maybe, I think his will was executed, I think.
Are you considering going after register designation for the park
Yes.
soon, or what's the plan?
Well, since this is a historical society, I'll give you the little slightly longer answer, if you don't mind. Last year, actually, in my portfolio of projects, I had National Register nominations for Frick, Highland, and Riverview, and an update for Shenley. And Shenley is on the National Register, but it was done in the early days of landscape on the National Register, and it's really thin now. It's not detailed in the way that you need, or that is current practice. So we were just going to do the 4. Michael Eversmeyer, I don't know if any of you knew Michael, he's a terrific historian based in Highland Park, had started work on the Highland Park Register nomination, and we were working with him on that. So when we went to the State Historic Preservation Officer and said, we have an intention to do this, we think it's important, we want to let you know, and we want your advice about proceeding and kind of timetables and review periods and so forth. What we were told was that the state really prefers now a system nomination in which the whole Pittsburgh park system would be nominated to the National Register, and you'd have to tell the story of each era of park design and give some examples from each era. And so it takes a lot more money and effort to do that. The benefit is that when that is then listed on the National Register, any individual park nomination is really simple to do because you've already proven the context and the value of the system. So then you can, sort of cut to the chase. You don't have to keep telling the story over and over again with each park nomination. So we're really interested in doing that, but we have to raise money to do that because it's that would have been about a $20,000 to $25,000 project. Now it's more like a probably $35,000 to $40,000 project. So there are some other park organizations like Allegheny Commons Initiative, for example, that Allegheny Commons is not listed on the National Register, which is really unbelievable. And they would like to be. So we might try to put together sort of a coalition of organizations that want to help fund this. And a little bit here and there, maybe a little bit from some of the council people, I think we could put the budget together. I put that on my list as a goal for my work plan, actually starting July 1st, going through next June, is to get that at least underway.
Are any other park systems in Pennsylvania on the register?
Fairmount Park is.
Fairmount.
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, yes.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there are other individual parks. I'm not familiar with.
We know there's
which
two
ones.
golf courses in Pennsylvania that are national register or even national historic landmarks.
Are there?
The Bedford Resort is not only on the register as a landmark, but so is the golf course because of the history of golf. And Oakmont has registered status.
That's one always was.
Wow. Yeah, golf course history is an interesting sidebar to all of this.
Question.
Yes.
What about the role of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy in its parks and gardens with the vision that they have? Have they worked with them too much on this? Have they been too spread out and have sort of done the other to let you guys handle yours?
They really haven't done much of anything in the parks within the city. They were involved with the master plan for Mellon Park. And of course they do, wonderful work on the highway rights of way and that sort of thing. We've worked with them mostly through the Tree Vitalize program, which is housed there and which funnels a lot of money into local tree planting. So just recently we advised them on where the new trees should go in Mellon Park that are lower Mellon Park that are being planted with these funds. And they provide trees for other park projects. We're also, I think, probably going to be working with them on some land acquisition in the Hill District because we're working on a green print plan for the Hill District. And we want to add some parcels to existing parks to create a trail that goes all the way around the district. Yes?
What's happening with the tree restoration in Frick Park?
The oak wilt, which caused the destruction of 2 acres, which is horrifying. It's been that acreage has now been reseeded, and the idea is to restore it over time to woodland, but to make it higher quality so that there's grassland meadow area, there's edge condition, and then there's woodland. Whereas before it was kind of mowed and then woods. And birds and other wildlife really love edge conditions in between the woods and the grass. So that's part of the plan, but it's going to take a while. And we're really worried about oak wilt, and we're also really worried about the emerald ash borer because we've found it. I mean, it's here in the city. And so the ash is a huge proportion of the tree population in the park. So we need to be working now to aggressively start planting replacement trees. Yes?
Was the choice of James Poe, the choice of that citizens committee, or
No.
was that?
That was the Frick family.
Okay.
And they were really involved in the early years of the trust. Helen Frick was involved with the environmental center, with the one that opened in the house, the old farmhouse that burned. And then she was also consulted with the one that burned in 2002 as well. And Childs visited the park in the 20s and 30s and had things to say about the golf course acquisitions and things like that. Anybody else? Yes.
In my
very, very young childhood memory. I remember 3 fountains on Clay Hill. Am I correct? Is that a false memory?
I only know of 2.
I just remember one.
Yeah. I only know of 2, but that's not to say that at some point in time somebody didn't put something in.
We'll take a couple more questions.
Yeah, and I'm happy to stick around a little bit if anybody wants to talk. And just to remind you all, please do grab one or more of these little cards and share them with people that you think will want to have some input in the master plan, because once you go to this site and sign on, then you become part of an ongoing communications network about this project.
You have a question?
I don't know what, where they're going, really going on Reynolds and Ford.
The other one is that, well, Reynolds is 1, Beachwood Boulevard's 2, and Forbes, that's 4. It's not really a gatehouse at Forbes, it's more of that shelter.
Are you gonna spruce that up?
We want to. The weather vane was falling off it, and we took that and we put it in our office for safekeeping. And we've gone out and done a little assessment. We have a small budget, so we know what it would cost to do the stone restoration, but we don't have funds for it right now.
Susan, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you in September across the street. Have a nice summer.